I still remember the day John and I decided to start saving for our dream home. It was a crisp autumn evening, and we were walking through a charming neighborhood, admiring the beautiful houses with their perfectly manicured lawns and inviting front porches. We stopped in front of a particularly lovely two-story colonial, its windows glowing warmly in the fading light. "Someday," John said, squeezing my hand, "we'll have a home just like that." I smiled up at him, feeling a surge of excitement and determination. "Let's make it happen," I replied. "We can do this if we really try." From that day forward, our lives became a carefully choreographed dance of frugality and hard work. We cut back on everything: no more dinners out, no vacations, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary. Every spare dollar went into our savings account. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, often pulling double shifts that left me exhausted but satisfied knowing we were one step closer to our goal. John, an IT specialist, started freelancing on the weekends, spending long hours hunched over his computer, lines of code reflected in his glasses. "You're working too hard," I'd sometimes say, massaging his tense shoulders. He'd just shake his head and smile. "It'll all be worth it when we're sitting on our own porch, watching the sunset." Years passed, marked by the steady growth of our savings account. We celebrated each milestone: $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, with a quiet toast and renewed determination. Our friends thought we were crazy, constantly turning down invitations and living like misers. "Live a little," they'd say. "You're only young once." But we had our eyes on the prize. We knew what we wanted, and we were willing to sacrifice for it. Finally, after 7 long years of scrimping and saving, we hit our target: $350,000. It felt surreal to look at that number in our account, knowing what it represented: years of hard work, countless sacrifices, and the promise of our future home. We started house hunting immediately, spending our weekends driving through neighborhoods, attending open houses, and imagining our life in each property we visited. It was during one of these outings that we found it, the perfect house. It was a beautiful craftsman-style home, with a wide front porch, hardwood floors, and a spacious backyard perfect for the family we hoped to start. The moment we walked in, I could picture our life there: holiday gatherings in the dining room, lazy Sunday mornings in the sunny kitchen, cozy evenings by the fireplace. "This is it," I whispered to John, squeezing his hand. He nodded, a broad smile spreading across his face. We were ready to make an offer. Our dream was finally within reach. That evening, we sat at our small kitchen table, papers spread out before us, discussing our strategy. "We should offer the full asking price," John said. "I don't want to risk losing it." I nodded in agreement, my heart racing with excitement and nerves. "Let's call the realtor first thing in the morning." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as we were about to head to bed, John's phone rang. It was his mother, Barbara. "Hey, Mom," John answered, his voice cheerful. But as he listened, his expression changed, morphing from confusion to concern. "Wait, what? Slow down, Mom. What do you mean you're losing the house?" I watched, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach, as John listened to his mother. The conversation seemed to stretch on forever, though it probably only lasted a few minutes. When he finally hung up, John looked shell-shocked. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. John ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. "It's Mom," he said, his voice heavy. "She's in trouble. Big trouble. She's about to lose her house because of some debts she's accumulated. She didn't want to worry us, so she never said anything, but now..." He trailed off, looking lost. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. Barbara had always been so put together, so responsible. How could this have happened? And why now, just when we were so close to achieving our dream? "How much does she owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. John swallowed hard. "A lot. More than she can possibly pay off on her own." We sat in stunned silence, the weight of this unexpected crisis pressing down on us. Our carefully laid plans, our years of sacrifice, our dream home, suddenly, it all felt like a castle made of sand, crumbling before our eyes. Little did I know, This was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test the very foundations of our marriage and force me to fight for everything I held dear. The tension in the air was palpable as John, Barbara, and I sat around our small dining table. The cheerful yellow walls of our apartment seemed to mock the somber mood. Barbara had arrived an hour ago, her eyes red-rimmed and her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. The gravity of her financial situation had become clearer as she explained the details. A combination of medical bills, bad investments, and a few ill-advised loans had left her drowning in debt. "I just don't know what I'm going to do," Barbara said, her voice quavering. She clutched her coffee mug like a lifeline, her knuckles white. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. I could be out on the street in a matter of weeks." I felt a mix of sympathy and frustration. While I understood her distress, a small, selfish part of me couldn't help but resent the timing of this crisis. John reached out and patted his mother's hand, his face a mask of concern. "We'll figure something out, Mom," he said softly. "We won't let you lose your home." I shot him a sharp look. What did he mean by we? Surely he wasn't suggesting. Barbara's next words confirmed my fears. "Actually," she began, her eyes darting between John and me, "I've been thinking. You two have been saving up to buy a house, right?" My stomach dropped. I knew where this was going, but I desperately hoped I was wrong. "What if," Barbara continued, her voice gaining strength, "you used that money to buy my house instead? It would be a safe investment for you, and I could stay there and pay you rent. A low rent, of course, considering the circumstances." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at Barbara in disbelief, then turned to John, expecting, hoping, to see the same shock on his face. Instead, I saw something that shook me to my core: consideration. "John," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you in the kitchen for a moment?" Once in the kitchen, I rounded on him. "You can't seriously be considering this," I hissed. John ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times over the years when he was stressed. "I don't know, Sarah. What else can we do? We can't let her become homeless. But this is our money, John. Our future. We've worked so hard for this." I know," he said, his voice pained. "But she's my mother. We have to help her somehow." I felt as if I was in a bizarre dream. How had we gone from being on the verge of buying our dream home to considering using all our savings to bail out my mother-in-law? "There has to be another way," I insisted. "What about a loan? Or she could sell her house and downsize." John shook his head. "Her credit is shot, and selling the house wouldn't cover all her debts. Plus, where would she live?" "She could rent an apartment," I suggested, grasping at straws. "On her fixed income? Come on, Sarah. You know that's not feasible in this area." I leaned against the counter, feeling defeated. "So what, we just give up on our dreams? Everything we've worked for?" John's eyes softened. He stepped closer, putting his hands on my shoulders. "It wouldn't be giving up. We'd still have a house, it would just be a different one than we planned. And we'd be helping family. Isn't that important too?" I shrugged off his hands, anger bubbling up inside me. "Don't try to guilt me, John. This isn't fair, and you know it." Before he could respond, Barbara's voice came from the dining room. "Is everything okay in there?" We exchanged a look before John called back. "We're coming, Mom. Just discussing some options." As we returned to the table, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. Barbara looked up at us expectantly, hope shining in her eyes. It made me feel like a monster for even considering saying no. "We haven't made any decisions yet," John said carefully, sitting down. "This is a big thing to consider. We need some time to talk it over." Barbara nodded, but I could see the relief in her posture. She thought we were going to agree. I felt sick. Of course," she said. "I understand. It's a lot to ask. But just think, it could be a wonderful solution for all of us. You'd be landlords, building equity. And I'd have stability, knowing I'm living in a home owned by family who won't suddenly raise the rent or kick me out." I forced a tight smile, not trusting myself to speak. John, ever the diplomat, said, "We'll definitely give it serious thought, Mom. We just need some time." As Barbara prepared to leave, hugging us both tightly, I felt a sense of unreality. How had this become our life? How had our carefully laid plans been so thoroughly derailed in the space of a single evening? Once she was gone, John turned to me. "We should talk about this," he said. I shook my head, feeling overwhelmed. "Not tonight. I can't think about this right now." He nodded, looking as exhausted as I felt. "Okay. We'll sleep on it and discuss it tomorrow." As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that our dream was slipping away. The house we'd fallen in love with, the future we'd planned, it all seemed to be dissolving before my eyes. And what scared me most was the realization that John and I might not be on the same page anymore. I turned to look at him, his face peaceful in sleep, and wondered, how far would he go to help his mother? And at what cost to us, to our future? As dawn broke, I was no closer to an answer, but one thing was clear: our journey was far from over, and the road ahead looked rockier than I could have ever imagined. The days following Barbara's unexpected proposal were a blur of heated discussions and sleepless nights. Our small apartment, once a haven of love and shared dreams, had become a battleground. John and I circled each other warily, each conversation threatening to explode into another argument. "Sarah, we need to make a decision," John said one evening, his voice strained. We were sitting at opposite ends of the couch, the distance between us feeling more like miles than inches. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought we had made a decision. This is our money, John. Our future. We can't just give it away." John's jaw tightened. "We're not giving it away. We'd be buying a house, just like we planned. It's an investment." "An investment?" I scoffed. "In what?" "Your mother's poor financial decisions." As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. John's face darkened with anger. "That's not fair, and you know it. She's family, Sarah. We can't just abandon her." "And what about us?" I shot back, my own anger rising. "What about our plans, our dreams? Are we supposed to just abandon those?" John stood up, pacing the small living room. "We can still have those things. It'll just take a little longer." I laughed bitterly. "A little longer? John, we've been saving for 7 years. 7 years of sacrifices, of missing out on vacations, of working extra shifts. And now you want to throw it all away?" "I'm not throwing anything away." John's voice rose. "I'm trying to help my mother and find a compromise that works for everyone." "A compromise?" I stood up too, facing him. "How is this a compromise? We lose our dream home, and your mother gets bailed out of her mistakes. Where's the compromise in that?" We went back and forth like this for days, each conversation ending in frustration and hurt feelings. I tried to reason with John, to make him see the irrationality of the situation, but it was like talking to a brick wall. His mind was made up. The tension in our marriage reached a breaking point about a week after Barbara's visit. I came home from a grueling shift at the hospital to find John sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him. "What's all this?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. John looked up, his expression a mix of determination and guilt. "I've been looking at the numbers. If we buy Mom's house, we could still save enough for our own place in a few years. It's not ideal, but not ideal?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "John, this is insane. We're about to throw away our entire future on a whim." "It's not a whim." John stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is my mother we're talking about. I can't just stand by and watch her lose everything." "And what about us?" I asked, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. "What are we losing in this scenario?" John's voice softened slightly. "We're not losing anything, Sarah. We're just adjusting our plans." I shook my head, a feeling of hopelessness washing over me. "I can't believe this is happening. I feel like I'm losing everything, our dreams, our future, and now I feel like I'm losing you too." John reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "You're not losing me, Sarah. We're in this together." "Are we?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you've already made your choice. And it wasn't me." The hurt in John's eyes was palpable, but at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt betrayed, not just by his decision, but by his willingness to disregard everything we'd worked for. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. "Sarah, wait!" John called after me, but I was already gone. As I walked aimlessly through our neighborhood, tears streaming down my face, I realized that this conflict had grown beyond just the issue of the house. It had exposed a fundamental difference in our priorities, in our vision for our future. And for the first time since we'd gotten married, I found myself wondering if John and I were truly on the same page anymore. The cool night air did little to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Our dream was slipping away, and with it, the foundation of trust and shared purpose that our relationship had been built on. As I finally turned back towards home, I knew that whatever happened next would change our lives forever. The gentle Saturday morning sunlight filtering through our bedroom curtains did nothing to soften the blow of John's words. I had just begun to stir, my mind still foggy with sleep, when I felt him sit on the edge of the bed. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice laced with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "We need to talk." I sat up slowly, my heart already sinking. Something in his tone told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "What is it, John?" He took a deep breath, his eyes avoiding mine. I made the transfer this morning. The money's gone through. Mom's bought the house." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and I felt as if I was falling through space. "You, what?" I finally managed to choke out. "I'm sorry," John said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away as if his touch would burn me. I know we hadn't fully agreed, but Mom was running out of time. The bank was going to foreclose next week. I had to act fast. I threw off the covers and stood up, needing to put physical distance between us. "You had to act fast," I repeated, my voice rising with each word. "So you just decided to make this massive decision without me? Without my consent?" John stood too, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Sarah, please try to understand. This was the right thing to do. Mom needed our help." Stop, I shouted, surprising even myself with the vehemence in my voice. "Just stop, John. Don't you dare try to justify this. You've just thrown away our entire future without even consulting me." "I haven't thrown away our future," John argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can still save up again. It'll just take a little longer." A bitter laugh escaped me. "A little longer? We spent 7 years saving that money, John. 7 years. And you gave it all away in a single morning." The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, and with it came a wave of nausea. Our dreams, our plans, our future, all of it had been sacrificed on the altar of John's misplaced sense of filial duty. "Where does this leave us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where do we go from here?" John took a step towards me, his hand outstretched. "We'll figure it out together, Sarah. We always do." I shook my head, backing away from him. "No, John. There's no we in this decision. You made this choice alone. You chose your mother over our marriage, over our future." "That's not fair," John protested, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. He knew, on some level, that what he'd done was a betrayal. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd dreamed of, was gone. And worse, the trust that had been the foundation of our relationship had been shattered. "I need to get out of here," I said, grabbing some clothes and heading for the bathroom. "I can't even look at you right now." "Sarah, please," John called after me. "Let's talk about this. We can work it out." But I wasn't listening anymore. As I got dressed, my mind was racing. I needed to protect myself, to salvage something from this wreckage. John had made his choice, and now I needed to make mine. As I emerged from the bathroom, I saw John sitting on the bed, his head in his hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered what he'd done, and my resolve hardened. "I'm going out," I said, grabbing my purse. "Don't wait up." "Where are you going?" John asked, his voice small and uncertain. I paused at the door, looking back at him. In that moment, I hardly recognized the man I'd married. I'm going to figure out how to protect my future, I said. Since it's clear I can't count on you to do that anymore. As I walked out of our apartment, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, fear, but also a growing sense of determination. John might have given away our savings, but I wasn't about to let him give away my future too. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My finger hovered over it for a moment before I pressed call. "Hello," I said as the person on the other end picked up. "This is Sarah Johnson. I need to schedule an appointment with a lawyer as soon as possible. It's about protecting my assets in a potential divorce." As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd imagined my Saturday morning going, but one thing was clear: I needed to take control of my life, starting now. Whatever came next, I knew I had to be prepared to fight for myself and my future. The law office was cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to the turmoil of emotions raging inside me. I sat across from Mr. Thompson, a seasoned divorce attorney with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He listened intently as I poured out my story, occasionally jotting down notes on his legal pad. "So, Mrs. Johnson," he said when I finished, "you want to understand your rights and options in this situation. Is that correct?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes. I need to know where I stand legally. And..." I hesitated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I need to know what my options are if I decide to pursue a divorce." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Well, the good news is that you do have options. The bad news is that your situation is a bit complicated." He explained that because the money was in a joint account, John had the legal right to move it. This revelation felt like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to focus as Mr. Thompson continued. "However," he said, "the fact that this money was earmarked for a shared goal, buying a house together, could work in your favor. It shows intent for joint use of the funds." A glimmer of hope sparked within me. "So what should I do?" "First," Mr. Thompson said, "start gathering evidence. Emails, text messages, any documentation that shows your shared plans for this money. We need to establish that this wasn't just your husband's personal savings, but a joint investment in your future." I nodded, my mind already racing through years of conversations and plans. "I can do that. What else?" "Next, document everything related to this recent decision. Your discussions, any agreements or disagreements. If you can prove that this decision was made unilaterally, against your wishes, it strengthens your case." As Mr. Thompson spoke, I felt a sense of purpose growing within me. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about standing up for myself, for our shared dreams that John had so easily discarded. "Now," Mr. Thompson continued, his tone becoming more serious, "I have to ask. Are you certain you want to pursue divorce? Sometimes, in heated situations like this, people make rash decisions." I took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. "I'm not certain of anything right now," I admitted. "But I need to be prepared for all possibilities. John's actions have shaken my trust in him to the core." Mr. Thompson nodded understandingly. "That's a wise approach. Let's proceed with gathering evidence and documenting the situation. This will give you options, whether you decide to fight for your share of the investment or pursue a divorce." As I left the law office, my head was spinning with all the information, but I felt more in control than I had in days. I had a plan now, a course of action. My first stop was an office supply store, where I bought a notebook to document everything. Then I headed to a cafe, ordered a large coffee, and began the painstaking process of combing through years of emails and messages. I was surprised by how emotional this task was. Each loving message about our future home, each excited discussion about neighborhoods and house styles, felt like a knife twisting in my heart. But I pushed through, copying and pasting relevant conversations into a document, noting dates and contexts. As the afternoon wore on, I expanded my search. I found old budget spreadsheets we'd created together, showing how we'd allocated our salaries towards our house fund. I uncovered photos of houses we'd viewed, complete with our excited comments about potential renovations. By the time the cafe was closing, I had amassed a substantial amount of evidence. It painted a clear picture of our shared dream, our joint effort towards a common goal. Looking at it all laid out before me, I felt a renewed sense of injustice at what John had done. Back at home, I quietly copied important documents, bank statements, tax returns, anything that showed our financial history together. John was out, probably at his mother's new house, and I was grateful for the solitude. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't ready to make any drastic decisions yet, but I knew I needed to be prepared for any outcome. I opened my laptop and began researching affordable apartments in the area, just in case. The next morning, I woke up early and headed to the bank before John was awake. I opened a separate account in my name only and transferred half of what remained in our joint checking account. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a safety net if things went south. As I drove home, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would go, but I was resolved to protect myself and my future, no matter what it took. The day of confrontation arrived sooner than I had anticipated. Armed with a folder full of evidence and the quiet strength of legal advice, I steeled myself for what was to come. John had been walking on eggshells around me for days, and Barbara had been conspicuously absent from our lives. But today, that would change. I had asked them both to meet me at our apartment. As I waited, my heart pounding, I ran through the speech I had prepared countless times. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before opening it. Barbara stood there, looking uncomfortable but defiant. John appeared behind her, his face a mask of anxiety. "Come in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We gathered in the living room, the tension palpable. I sat across from them, the folder on my lap like a shield. "Thank you for coming," I began, my tone formal and detached. "We need to discuss what's happened and where we go from here." John leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, I know you're upset, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Please, let me finish. What you both have done is not just a betrayal of my trust, but a unilateral decision that has severely impacted my financial future." I opened the folder and began laying out documents on the coffee table between us. Bank statements, emails, text messages, a paper trail of our shared dreams and plans. For 7 years, I continued, my voice gaining strength, John and I saved for our future. We had a goal, a shared vision. And in one morning, without my consent or input, that was all thrown away. Barbara shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. "I've consulted a lawyer, and I want you both to understand the seriousness of this situation. We have 2 options here." John's face paled. "Options?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "Option 1, we find a fair solution. The house is put in all 3 of our names, with a legally binding agreement about its eventual sale and the division of proceeds. John and I receive a larger share to compensate for our investment." Barbara started to protest, but I continued before she could speak. "Option 2, I file for divorce and initiate legal proceedings to recover my share of the investment. Given the evidence I've gathered," I gestured to the documents on the table, "my lawyer believes I have a strong case." The silence that followed was deafening. John looked shell-shocked, while Barbara's face was a mix of indignation and fear. "You can't be serious," Barbara finally sputtered. "This is family, Sarah." "You wouldn't really " "I am entirely serious," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Family doesn't take advantage of family. Family doesn't steal dreams." John reached out, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Sarah, please," he begged. "We can work this out. We don't need lawyers or threats." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in days. The man I loved was still there, beneath the fear and guilt, but trust had been broken. It would take more than pleas to fix this. "I'm not making threats, John. I'm stating facts. You made a choice without me, and now I'm making my own choices. Ball's in your court." Barbara stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I won't be bullied in this way. John, let's go." But John didn't move. He was staring at the documents on the table, realization dawning on his face. "Mom," he said slowly, "Sarah's right. What we did, it wasn't fair. We need to make this right." Barbara looked at her son in disbelief. "But John, we had an agreement." The house was bought with our money," John interrupted. Money we saved together, for our future. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I got caught up in trying to help Mom, and I lost sight of us, of our dreams. Can we try to fix this? I felt a glimmer of hope, but I squashed it down. We had a long way to go. That depends, I said carefully. Are you willing to renegotiate everything? To put our future first? John nodded emphatically. Yes, absolutely. Whatever it takes. Barbara sank back into her seat, defeated. I never meant for this to cause so much trouble. Perhaps we can find a compromise. I looked between them, feeling the first stirrings of relief. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a start. Okay, I said, my voice softening slightly. Let's talk about how we can make this right. For all of us. As we began to discuss terms, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be challenging, full of difficult conversations and compromises. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a chance to rebuild not just our financial future, but the trust that had been broken. It wouldn't be easy, but as I looked at John, I knew it was worth fighting for. The weeks following our confrontation were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal consultations, and emotional conversations. It wasn't easy, but slowly, we began to piece together a solution that could work for everyone. After multiple meetings with our lawyer and a mediator, we finally reached an agreement. The house would be put in all three of our names, with John and I holding a 70% share and Barbara the remaining 30%. We established a detailed contract outlining the terms of Barbara's residency, including a modest rent that would go towards household maintenance and future renovations. Most importantly, we set up a clause for the eventual sale of the house. John and I would recoup our initial investment first, with the remaining profits split according to our ownership percentages. It wasn't the dream home we had envisioned, but it was a compromise we could live with. As we signed the final documents, I felt a mix of relief and lingering sadness. It's done, John said softly, squeezing my hand. I nodded, managing a small smile. It's a start. But I knew that legal documents and financial arrangements were just the beginning. The real work lay in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. On the recommendation of our mediator, John and I started couples therapy. Our first session was awkward and tense, with both of us struggling to express our feelings without reigniting old arguments. John, our therapist, Dr. Martinez, said gently, "Can you explain why you felt it was necessary to make that decision without consulting Sarah?" John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I guess I panicked. Mom was in trouble, and I felt responsible. I didn't think about the long-term consequences. And Sarah, Dr. Martinez turned to me. How did that make you feel? I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. Betrayed. Like our partnership, our dreams, meant nothing to him. Like I couldn't trust him with our future. Over the weeks, we delved deeper into our issues. We uncovered patterns of communication that needed work, expectations that had gone unspoken, and fears that had driven us apart. It was painful, often leaving us emotionally drained, but it was necessary. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. We started talking more openly, not just about the big issues, but about our daily lives, our hopes, our worries. We instituted a weekly State of the Union meeting, where we discussed our finances and any decisions that needed to be made together. One evening, about 3 months after the confrontation, John and I were sitting on our small balcony, watching the sunset. "I've been thinking," John said hesitantly, "maybe we could start saving again. For our own place." I looked at him, surprised. "Really? You'd want to do that?" He nodded, his eyes serious. "I know it'll take time to rebuild what we had, but I want to try. If you're willing." I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in months. "I'd like that," I said softly. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were still arguments, moments of doubt, times when the pain of what had happened threatened to overwhelm us. But we were committed to working through it, to rebuilding our relationship stronger than before. Our relationship with Barbara also underwent a transformation. At first, she was resentful of the new arrangement, feeling like she had lost control. But as time passed, she began to see the benefits of our more structured approach. She started taking financial management classes and even began contributing more to the household expenses as her situation improved. As I reflect on this journey, I'm struck by how much I've learned. I've learned the importance of clear communication, of setting boundaries even with family, and of standing up for myself and my dreams. I've learned that love isn't always enough, it needs to be paired with respect, trust, and shared goals. Most importantly, I've learned the value of protecting my financial interests, even within a marriage. John and I have since set up separate savings accounts in addition to our joint one, ensuring we both have a measure of financial independence. Today, as I look at our vision board for our future home, a new one we created together, I feel a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead is still long, and there will undoubtedly be more challenges to face. But I know now that I have the strength to face them, to fight for what I believe in, and to protect my future. Our dream may have been deferred, but it's not defeated. And in its place, we're building something new, a partnership based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. It's not the future I had imagined, but in many ways, it's stronger and more resilient than what we had before. As I close my journal, recording these thoughts, I realize that this experience, painful as it was, has given me something invaluable. The knowledge that I can weather any storm, that I have the power to shape my own destiny. And for that, despite everything, I'm grateful.